Hey everybody, welcome to another Rackspace Office Hours. My name's Alan Bush. We're broadcasting live from the Castle, Rackspace's headquarters here in San Antonio, Texas. Joined as always by Drew Cox.
Hello, hello.
We've got a very special guest with us today, our Chief Security Officer here at Rackspace, Brian Kelly.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Very glad that you took a little bit of time out of your busy day to join us and share a little bit of information with our audience.
My pleasure.
So we've been doing a series of year in review wrap-ups. Last week we had on Jeff Cotton with a look at the year in review for Amazon Web Services, and that was a really nice, insightful visit there. Before that, we had on Kent Kingery and Jeff DeVerter talking a little bit about the Microsoft Cloud and the year in review there. And so this to wrap up our year, our 2016 season, we brought Brian along to talk a little bit about your area of expertise, security. So glad to have you. Because we've had Jeff on the last 2 weeks, I'll probably refer to you as Jeff the whole time, and I apologize in advance.
I respond to hey you, so that's okay.
All right, so hey you, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing here at Rackspace?
No, pleasure. Yeah, I've actually been part of the Rack for 2 years now. Just went over 2 years. This fall. I can't admit I'm young though. I have been in the security industry for a long time.
You are, and you had a birthday earlier this week, so happy birthday!
Yeah, crossed into another decade. So that was I'm seeking counseling if you know anybody.
We'll put the good word out. Yeah.
But just been involved in security in a lot of different facets for 30 to 35 years, 20 plus years with the government. Spent some time out in defense industry. Sure. Most of my time in the private sector. More recently, ran a company, one of the first cyber intelligence companies. Led Rudy Giuliani's Advanced Security Center and Forensics Lab in Manhattan. Did Big Four consulting, so got a chance to walk the halls and see how other people do things, and then been head down here at Rackspace for 2 years.
Great. Well, we're very happy to have you. And I think you've been putting together a great security operation here at Rackspace. We've had a few of your colleagues on before to talk a little bit about Rackspace and what we're doing with managed security here. So the crack team, and they're doing a great job. So we appreciate bringing you coming on to talk a little bit more about your area of expertise.
Pleasure.
So let's jump right into it. So I mean, this is we have just a couple more weeks left in 2016. So let's take a look at some of the bigger security trends that we all saw here in 2016.
Yeah, I think as I was walking up here thinking about it, I think one of the things that struck me about 2016 is I feel like the industry's gotten a more balanced perspective. In years prior, there was a lot of hype, right? A lot of hype around the threat. And then we all gravitated to this cool term, APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, and some of the technologies were getting hyped and certain attacks, ransomware and so forth. And, for practitioners day to day, and there's many of them out there, I get frustrated by the hype, right? Because it distracts from the fundamentals, the block and tackling, and the things that we've got to do day to day. And quite frankly, it's does a disservice to our leadership teams, right? Because they're reading the papers and they're listening to content and things, and they come in asking questions about some new hyped up subject. I think it's so important in security. I mean, it's here to stay, right? We all know it's a big issue. That's no surprise. We all read the fact that it's a board level issue. It certainly is. But it's just a part of what organizations are going to have to deal with. And I think we need to take a much more practical view of security. I know when I got my opportunity to stand in front of our board, which was within 48 hours of joining, which was a little quick, but
welcome.
but it was actually a welcomed opportunity. I think the relationship with the board was terrific. I enjoyed that. I respect their guidance. But one of the first things I told them is I said, look, you'll hear people talk about prevent. And I'm going to tell you right now, you can't prevent this stuff. And that's a little bit of a shock, right? Until you really think it through. my message was that, look, bad stuff is going to happen to the best of companies. And as a leadership team, we need to expect that. So let's get over that now. And we'll change that model. We'll take that word prevent out and I'll substitute deter, right? I mean, we'll make it as difficult as we can for adversaries through layers of defense. But what it implies is we've got to be very, very good at our ability to detect anomalous activity and then respond effectively to that. And for me, that really largely set my kind of agenda, if you will, for year one, was to be absolutely certain and confident that here at Rackspace, we were the best we could possibly be. And the ability to detect and respond security operations in general is a never-ending continuous improvement. So you kind of never get to that final point because we're always adapting. But I needed to know that we were as good as we could possibly be. And so really year one for me was largely a focus on security operations.
Well, it really is analogous to health in the way I think about security. I mean, personally, you can do a lot to help prevent or deter some health hazard from coming up. I mean, trying to stay in shape and eating right and keeping a real close eye on, is that sniffle from allergies or have I been around a lot of people who've been sick, or what's going on here, so I can quickly address an issue that shows up. And a lot of times people assume that it's more like something you can absolutely keep from happening. People are going to get injured, people are going to get sick, but how you handle that and how you're prepared before that happens really changes how that impacts you.
You should have a doctor, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, even though you may think you're the healthiest person in the world and you live a very healthy lifestyle, tomorrow you may end up with something that needs medical attention.
Oh, absolutely.
And you want to have somebody you can go talk to. So I think it's very much kind of analogous to kind of what we're all about.
Yeah, and I think that absolute prevent mindset that we've shifted away from has been a very good thing for the market to understand. Is it's impossible to say nothing is ever going to happen ever. The only way to do that is to shutter the doors and have nothing worth finding, and that's not viable.
And the challenge with that message oftentimes is delivering the message in a way that you don't cross that threshold into creating fear, right? And the intent is not to scare people, scare executives, scare employees, but it's to really be very realistic and recognize that things are going to happen, and we just need to know that we've got eyes and ears that can detect that in a reasonable amount of time, and then we've got effective process to be able to respond to that. So it's sometimes difficult to deliver the message because it does have a fear component to it. Like, oh gosh, so we have to get ready for an incident. Well, yes, but not in a the big bad guys are coming and they're gonna tear us to shreds. I mean, in fact, just the opposite is on the tail end of this process, is to kind of instill confidence to say, okay, I get it. Things are going to happen. But something, we've got a fairly robust ability to detect anomalous activity. We've got fairly well thought out, comprehensive processes to deal with an incident. We have skill sets that can go deep in terms of forensics capabilities, and we understand things like chain of custody and rules of evidence. So there's all of that process in place that when that event occurs, we can handle it in a way that will help us achieve kind of a level of successful outcome.
Absolutely.
That's good. So I like this practical, pragmatic, approach to things, and acknowledging that, there will be some breaches, or there will be some issues, but then, when you accept that, then you can get away from, spending as much time deterring or preventing, and more times figuring out, what to do and how to fix it when that doesn't happen.
And we started this with your question because in prior years, it just seemed like a lot of hype. We were talking about, foreign governments and all this stuff. And granted, it's in the news today, of course, as we speak. But it feels to me as if it's toned down a little bit, and that I think we're on the right path. Yeah, some stuff still gets hyped a lot, and we hear a lot about ransomware, and obviously in the news now is the DNC and the RNC, and so there'll always be a component of that. But I think among the security professionals, I feel like, okay, we're past that. We understand the APT and we understand the state-sponsored stuff. So that's good. The other thing that I think is a realization in the industry that I like is, and I often say that probably one of our biggest threats is self-imposed, right? And it's complexity.
Absolutely.
And of course the other half of that is complexity is the enemy of security, right? So, and we've done it to ourselves, right? Now some of that was kind of a necessary reaction to emerging threats, and some technology will come out that'll kind of in a very point fashion address that threat, but that's kind of gone on for too long, right? So, you can walk in almost any organization and you just see this collection of point solutions that in many cases don't really talk to one another, and in worse cases they kind of confound each other and complicate matters to a point that you start to kind of lose efficiency. And it's something that I've noticed in the industry is now a recognition of that. I mean, as organizations are publishing their predictions, for 2017, I'm starting to see that kind of as a bit of a recurring theme. That we've got to kind of move to more of a platform kind of focus, away from point solutions, focus more on automation and orchestration. And we're starting to see that in a number of technologies. I feel like that's something I've been preaching for years. I've been on this complexity is the enemy bandwagon for quite some time. But it's nice now to see, industry peers, and the technology community that's serving us also recognizing that. And so I think that we're going to be able to make better progress as we start to see these technologies come together and work together in more of a kind of a platform sense as opposed to a point solution.
Well, there's always going to be another dollar you could spend on security for a new point solution, or another slightly additional hardening to something. But at a certain point, it takes good prioritization from a company to say, this is the absolute musts, and this is what we're willing to spend on that. And then everything after that is redundant, or we're willing to tolerate an amount of risk, or something along those lines. So talk about how that prioritization maybe has shifted from what we would have seen earlier this year to what we're seeing these days.
Yeah, I think if you take this practical view that we've been kind of alluding to here, a piece of that view is you can't protect everything, right? And quite frankly, you don't need to. And so there's a need to truly understand what kind of matters most to the organization, and then prioritize your defensive activities around the highest priority thing. I mean, one of the first things I did here was I just called it high value asset inventory. You can call it whatever you want, but it was precisely to answer that question. What do we care about? Right? If I can only address the top 20, I want to know what those are. But at the same time, I want the leadership team and the boards and audit committees to also share that vision with me of, these are the top 20, right?
If you have a very different opinion on that, then you need to be in agreement.
And that starts to weed out some of the things you're alluding to. I mean, when there's some of the cool technology, and they say, hey, we got to take a look at this technology. You have to ask yourself, does that really address a risk of one of our high priority items? And in a lot of cases, you may find out it's not the case. So look, let's not waste cycles on that. We need to stay laser beam focused on the things that matter most. And then as those protection mechanisms mature and develop, then you can kind of go deeper into the environment. So Another thought, and this obviously has a bias, but 2 years into Rackspace, but also 2 years into my education on cloud, and the analysts and the surveys will tell us and have told us for quite some time that security and compliance has really been the inhibitor to cloud adoption. And I understand that perspective, right? But I think it's not really security that's the inhibitor. I like to replace it with uncertainty, right? That they just don't necessarily know what happens once it leaves their premise. And that's really a failing on the cloud industry, quite frankly. We've got an obligation to provide greater visibility and greater transparency, and I think that'll begin to address that uncertainty, which oftentimes is equated with, I just don't feel like my important stuff is secure.
Right.
And so that's an area that we're focused on.
Yeah. Well, and then you can cascade down your, what are your top 20 assets or whatever. You can approach that with the customer and, have them, make sure that they have enumerated their most, their highest priorities and their high value assets, and
right.
Use all of that together. There is definitely some uncertainty, and I like that you're, acknowledging that we've, made some mistakes in the cloud industry. I mean, it was another one of those things there was certainly a lot of hype with the cloud industry, and now that it's kind of faded and it's now in the background, and we kind of have this idea of what the cloud is. I think that people are becoming more certain about the cloud, and that allows them to allows you to kind of prioritize which areas you need to secure the most and what is going to be most important. And then you also mentioned compliance, which is another big obstacle that we have to work on with our customers, that has a certain security element to it as well. I mean,
and compliance is interesting. I mean, I think for experienced executives and security professionals for certain, they realize that at the end of the day, compliance is a minimum standard. Right. I mean, we don't necessarily aspire to be compliant and then stop there, right? I mean, it's compliance in many respects is table stakes, right?
Yes.
And so we aspire to go much further beyond just meeting PCI requirements or high trust requirements. That said, though, customers are demanding at a minimum, that a number of different compliance standards are met, and it's healthy, I think, for us. I mean, sometimes it's a pain in the neck. I will be the first to admit it, but it's actually healthy for us to go through the rigorous process of understanding our systems and our design, understanding controls, mapping controls. If you do that effectively, it doesn't matter which compliance standards we're talking about, because fundamentally it's all the same controls, right? Give or take a few idiosyncrasies, but if you're PCI compliant, you've probably swept up a good chunk of the requirements for high trust, and you're probably already pretty far down the path on ISO, and then Cyber Essentials in the UK and IRAP in Australia. I mean, it kind of doesn't matter because there's a finite set of controls, and if you're very careful and effective in understanding, mapping, managing, maintaining evidence, and whatever compliance standard comes along, it should not be a big deal. So I want our focus to get beyond the compliance.
Sure.
To say, where can we go beyond a set of minimum standards that's even more valuable, to the organization and our customers.
Well, I think about that question, and I see complexity and sophistication really going to continue to accelerate, and new technologies are going to come out. People are going to want to adopt new things, but you're still going to end up seeing on the news all sorts of those kind of no-brainer, like I wish more people would buy into some of these, rotate passwords on a regular basis. Some of these table stakes kind of similar.
We call them essential practices.
Well, absolutely. But you're still going to see all sorts of news items about, people got this hacked or that hacked because they used simple passwords and things like that. So the reminder of, there are still people involved in the process, and that can often be where despite having all of the other things taken care of, some careless click on a link in an email is all that it takes to undo a lot of the hard work and the complexity and sophistication of the approach.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. The human factor is critical. And if you think you can design a technical solution that will solve those problems, you're misguided, right? I mean, you cannot lose sight of the human factor, and there's lots of things that we've got to do. I mean, training and awareness and testing and just a number of things to make sure that the employees and customers and partners are all really fully engaged. I mean, if you think about probably one of the most effective threat vectors, and this is written about in the industry, is phishing, right? Phishing coupled with social engineering. It's not too difficult to get employees' names and even go beyond that and get pretty authentic titles and use that. And you catch one employee on a bad day or not thinking clearly, they're rushing, and they pop a link, and then who knows where it goes from there, whether it's malware, whether they give up another piece of information. So that's a constant problem. There are interesting things that can be that can be done. I mean, virtualizing, some of the email and some of the things that people look at, so that we insulate them in a way that's transparent to them. I mean, they think they're interacting with the real email and everything, but basically it's a virtual instance, and that way, if they do click on the link, we've got one more safety net in place. And
it's we're talking about the 2016 year, and to me, I think that one of the biggest lessons that I picked up on this year was this human element is probably. I think you kind of started off the year with a blog on the human element is still the weakest link, and that is one of the things that really was cemented for me, because for a long time we in the industry threw technology, we threw products at security, and that certainly has a place in it, but it doesn't matter if someone can spearfish that right person and get a password, and that's how you do it. And that's unfortunately many of the breaches that we've seen. Some of the ones you mentioned earlier happened with very targeted phishing attacks.
And here's the challenge. I mean, if you just collect metrics, right? So there's metrics out there in the industry about the effectiveness of phishing attacks. I don't know the exact number, but it's pretty high. 50, 55%, give or take. Obviously much too high. And we do some very targeted phishing training and campaigning, and there are metrics associated with that. But if you think about it, it's somewhat laughable, because you can just say, hey, we are really doing great. The percentage of employees that fall for our phishing tests are less than 5%. But guess what? It only takes one. Right? Yeah. And so, I grin a little bit with that statistic. I say, okay, well, in relative terms, I guess I feel that our awareness campaigns and our training are working, but it's really got to be zero.
Perfection is a high bar.
And will we ever get it to zero? Again, this is the realism. I don't think we will. So that's where this defense in depth. I mean, do we, assuming an employee is going to click on a link, assuming an employee is going to give up a piece of information, what next then? Where does that go? How do you then respond to that type of activity?
And you have to keep the employees and everybody else, make sure that they understand the gravity of the situation, but then you have to be able to follow up if it goes through. Absolutely. Well, that's certainly interesting, and again, that human element. I'm kind of interested to hear some of your thoughts on how you find that balance. You mentioned that complexity is is essential for security, but then it's the enemy there. So how are companies finding the balance? Maybe this is looking ahead to 2017, but what would you recommend to people who are we have a lot of startups that are our customers. They especially need to be security conscious. Would you have any advice for them on finding that balance?
Yeah, it kind of comes back to the theme that we've been talking about in terms of kind of being realistic and practical. But I also think there are organizations that are afraid to ask for help. right? I mean, it's kind of like this is, the family secret, whether we're secure or not, and they try to do the best they can with what they have, and that's going to fail. I mean, absolutely. I mean, we see a large number of small to mid-sized customers that it's just not realistic that they would have the resources necessary to fight this challenge. But as we all kind of know too, one of the big challenges in our industry is a lack of skills, right? The lack of available security professionals. And so there are so many organizations out there that are trying to kind of fight this on their own the best they can. And that I think is a mistake right out of the box. I think they have to kind of recognize that this is something that they can't do alone. And they've got to go out and find capable resources to help them, and we believe in like to say, eat our own dog food too. I mean, there are things that can be outsourced through SaaS type opportunities that just make sense, right? I mean, you can spend a lot of time building and running your own public key infrastructure, for example, or you can look out to the private sector, where there are professionals who this is all they do for a living and offer these things, as security as a service. And I think you need to begin to look at those kinds of things. Again, I think that's where cloud is beginning to turn the tables a little bit, because as we said earlier, security being an inhibitor. We're not there yet, but I think we are beginning to see the early signs of organizations recognizing that, something, cloud providers have hundreds of security people, and that's all they do. Maybe we should think about leveraging that capability and not depending upon our 3-person team here that just read up on security over the last year. And I think as organizations get comfortable with that, and again, as the cloud providers do their side of it as well. I mean, it's not, hey, throw it over the wall and trust us. Obviously, we strive to earn that trust. But again, I think we have a part of that handshake where we need to give them that visibility and transparency, in some cases control, so that they're comfortable. But so it's a little bit of a different operating model with a topic that's somewhat very sensitive and uncomfortable for some executives. But you got to get to a point where you kind of let go a little bit,
right?
So to me, again, there's a bias here, but I'm excited with the promise of that. I mean, we've recently, in January of this year, kind of launched a managed service offering, managed security service offering, and it, not to just compete head on in the open market, but we've got a large enough client base that we know we can serve our customers and do more for them, as I said earlier, and the uptake on that business in a short period of time has been fantastic, and I think we've certainly proven that hey, there's a lot that a partner can do for you. And let you focus on your business and what matters to you, and have professionals who do this day in and day out, pick up that dirty work for you.
Well, I had an issue earlier in the year where my car was having problems, and I spent afternoon after afternoon in my driveway tinkering, trying to fix it. And eventually my wife just said, look, you've gotten a little bit of the way down this road, but it's going to be better if you go take it to a mechanic and get it addressed. I took it to a mechanic, and they were able to diagnose relatively quickly what's going on, how to fix it. And then it was something that they did part of it and I finished up. But that experience went a lot faster once I brought in somebody who deals with cars day in and day out, knows their way around, and can quickly give me an idea of where I need to spend my time.
And has the tools, right? I mean, like, that's the other thing too, is you might know exactly, hey, that's the alternator, but if you don't have the tools that you need to take the alternator out and replace it, you're not going to be able to get it done as efficiently and quickly as the professionals.
A good example of that, my own personal experience, I had a small engine fire, an old Volkswagen bus many years ago, and I think I'm pretty handy. So I thought I'll swap all this. So I had to swap out some wiring. Little did I know that I needed resistor wire in a couple of cases. And after killing myself for a few weeks and not realizing why it wasn't working, I brought in a pro. It took them all about 5 minutes to figure out what I did.
So, it's real handy to have somebody who does that for a living come in and solve that problem like it's child's play, rather than you busting your knuckles and trying to figure out what exactly is going on. And so to have people who are looking at the market, the broad landscape of IT security, they get to see what's the most recent thing going on, what are the new trends, not just looking myopically at one infrastructure and one solution, but broad infrastructures and broad solutions. They're able to see and apply across these different markets and medias that end up being far more valuable to the people who take advantage of that sort of an offering.
And we invest a lot of time in looking at existing and new technologies, piloting and testing. And so, for a small company with limited resources to begin with, have to go take themselves to a pilot and spend lots of hours with vendors. If they ask, we can probably share, here's the criteria we looked at, here's how it played out in our book. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we can do to kind of help one another. And I think security is very much, if you go it alone, it's a losing battle. It's just a matter of time, right? So on many levels, we have got to come together, whether it's customer, provider. I talk quite a lot about this publicly on the intelligence sharing. It's been a dicey topic, since 1990. When we really, the whole concept of the Information Sharing Analysis Center has kind of emerged, and I think everybody would admit that the first several years of those ISACs were rocky. I mean, there was very little sharing, right? There was a lot of take and no give. It wasn't timely. It wasn't relevant. Now they've come a long way. I mean, certain ISACs are doing a great job today, and then there's other offerings independent of the ISACs that are providing value in sharing indicators and tactics and things like that. We need that. We've got to work together. We've got an initiative working with other cloud providers to share intelligence kind of in real time. And in real time, and what I've challenged my operations team to do is that if you see something, then within an hour or two. I mean, obviously they got to stay focused on the attack, but I'm talking about an hour or two, not a day or a week. To say you need to characterize that and get that on the wire to the other players in our industry. And obviously one of the objections that you hear a lot is the anonymity of the sharing, and we use a platform that we host here that anonymizes the data and correlates it to previous inputs and so forth. So I think it's a pretty frictionless kind of system. But if I see a web shell attack tonight, within an hour or two, I want the other cloud providers to kind of know about it, because either they've already seen it or it's coming.
Well, and it's I think that internally we can have this economy of scale where customer A has an issue and we're able to mitigate it. We can apply that to all of our other customers. But then we can also, like you said, share that with everybody else, and and provide additional security for everybody. And that's I think that's just fantastic, and I do enjoy that trend of more open sharing.
I feel really good. I mean, the major cloud providers meet quarterly, the security teams specifically, and I feel very good about the level of cooperation. I mean, you don't feel the competitiveness. I mean, you feel a camaraderie that, hey, this is something that we're all fighting, and so I think people really drop their guard and agree to work together. I know I could pick up the phone and call Steven at Amazon or Brett at Microsoft, if I wanted to talk to them about something, and I think that's really, really healthy among the security professionals. So we talk a lot about it's not a single cloud. It's really about multi-cloud, right? And so to operate safely in the multi-cloud environment, our security teams need to be plugged in with one another on a pretty much near real-time basis.
Absolutely. And I mean, now that we are living in this multi-cloud world where, we see many of our own customers and our future customers that are transitioning their workloads from their own data centers to the cloud. I mean, these are things that are going to have to be solved on all of the clouds. And our ability to share that information makes everybody safer.
Yeah, and the back end of that too that I feel pretty strongly about is that it's always bothered me that and we know it, right? Companies have they get attacked and they might lose data or whatever. There's a natural tendency to want to keep it within their four walls, right? It's embarrassing. They don't want to take a brand hit and deal with all of that. But in some respects, that's extremely unhealthy, right? So I'm a big fan of we've got to err on the side of working together and working with law enforcement. To just accept these attacks as a cost of doing business, it's just irresponsible. So now, granted, there are conditions, very sensitive circumstances that all have to be taken into consideration. Sure. So I know I'm kind of making a little bit light of it, but the central theme is the same, that we got to err on the side of working with one another and working with law enforcement, and actually pursue these groups or individuals that are behind these attacks. They should not get a pass, and they should not have the ability to, if it didn't work on customer A, I'm going to try customer B and customer C. I mean, we've got to go after them with everything we have, and that's a position we take, working very closely with customers and with law enforcement.
Right.
The web is this giant shared resource, and if part of it starts to have health issues because of bad actors and things like that, it really behooves everyone to spend that time.
Yeah,
so that's good.
Definitely. Yeah. So one other thing on cloud. I mean, we kind of, as I think about 2016, I feel good going into 2017 because I think 2017 will continue some of these themes. This how do we drive complexity out? How do we take a more practical approach? How do we share information with each other? How do we work with law enforcement? I think those are all the right themes. Another thing that I'm very excited about is I think cloud has really become a catalyst for rethinking how security is done overall, right? I mean, and if this is hard, this sounds harsh, but I'll say it anyway. If you think back about all the things we've done in the security industry for the last kind of 20 years, nothing has really worked in totality, right? I mean, we still deal with serious issues every day. I mean, everything has a marginal effect, but we've not really got close enough to solving this challenge and this threat. And there's lots of reasons for that, but one of the things that I think through the lens of the cloud that's becoming apparent is that this kind of client server kind of view of security is not working, right? It's just too low in the stack, if you will. And so I think if we look at alternative models, and there are things happening in the industry today, and there's some great born in the cloud companies that I think are doing some very good work. I'll refer to kind of the things that are happening around software-defined networking and software-defined perimeter, microservices, containerization. None of those are perfect today, but there are components of what's occurring in that work that's really exciting to me, because it's actually taking security out of that kind of client server role, and moving it kind of up the stack and putting the controls much closer to the user. The controls are more granular. True, you have many more controls, but that's not a bad thing necessarily, right? There's a lot more intelligence, a lot more context when you have those controls. So as long as we can managing that, and all of that can be done in a way that's really transparent to the user. I mean, the user does what he needs to do, doesn't realize that he's actually being authenticated, you know, to a specific instance at a specific time with a one-time password, and you know that's very, very exciting to me. So you know, we're piloting pretty aggressively some of that technology today, and really thrilled with what we're seeing and the results of those pilots. I know many others are doing the same. We see instances of SDP and SDN already you know, functioning in the industry. So cloud, I think, is pushing us to a new era in how we architect security solutions.
Well, it's absolutely changed the way that we architect software solutions.
Yeah,
it's that security is an integral part of that. So it's you know, it's going to follow with that and change the way that you do it.
I wish we'd fix the rest of software. I mean, I think we, you know, that's a sore point as well.
We're getting there. It's a continual improvement. Well, maybe
but we tend to just add to existing software, and you know, I mean, there's been past exploits, you know, that an exploit takes advantage of a floppy disk controller that still exists within the software.
Inexplicably.
Right? Yeah. So, you know, I would love to think, you know, and I know it's probably unrealistic, but you know, I'd love to think that it's, you know, maybe it's time we clean up some of our software, because there's exposures there that you know, we haven't really given enough attention to.
That's a good point. And I mean, we're working with technology that's now 20, 30 years old, some of the software, and it's, you know, maybe it is time to, it is time to fix that. And, you know, things that, like you mentioned, that floppy disk controller, that was a real issue earlier this year, I think, if I remember correctly. And it's one of those things that nobody probably ever thought about, except for one curious person, and figured out that it could be used for malevolence. So, But what else are we looking forward to in 2017, or concerned about in 2017?
Yeah, you know, something that's gotten more and more attention in 2016, I think even more so now in 2017, is this kind of notion of active defense or hunt. You know, as I look at some other organizations' predictions for 2017, I think you see that appear quite often, and I agree with it. I think, you know, organizations realize that, you know, you can't just, you know, sit back and wait for something to occur. That you've got to be very thoughtful about, you know, understanding where certain you know, indicators of compromise or particular tactics, techniques, and procedures. You know, you've got to be able to get that information in a reasonable period of time, and then train your people to actually go look for these things. And there are some huge benefits. You know, we talked earlier about skills and training. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest lift that we've gotten from, we've been running active defense now for a year. We have a dedicated hunt mission planner on staff, former mission planner for the U.S. Air Force. We do countermeasure workshops, not only with the U.S. Air Force, but also with other industry peers here in San Antonio. So there's a lot of industry exchange. But you know, we've probably run 20, 30 hunt missions already. And it's very powerful, because what it allows your operators to do is stay busy every day, navigating through your complex and systems. They become familiar with the systems. They become familiar with the tools. You know, they learn more about these various tactics. There's a lot of exchange between employees throughout this process, and so we get a lift from so many different aspects running these missions. I mean, I know that's an area that could get hyped. I mean, it kind of sounds sexy and cool. It's not intended to be hype. I mean, for me, it's really just hands-on, real-time experience for the operators, and you'll be surprised what you see. You know, you may not see what you're looking for, but you may see something else that just says, "Wow, that's curious." And then you start asking some important questions about, "Hey, what is it that we're looking at?" And there's a lot of great intelligence that comes out of that in terms of how we might do things differently or whatever. So you know, I'm hearing more and more about that. I think we'll see more and more about hunt or active defense in people's 2017 predictions, and you know, I think that's a good thing.
Well, one of the ways that tellers are trained to get comfortable with money is just to deal with a lot of money and just use it over and over and over again until they're easily that something's off here, and they're able to track down there's something strange and ask the additional question, and that's how they're able to spot counterfeits and issues within our financial system.
Yeah, it almost becomes instinctive.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to a procedural step, it starts to kind of move to being more instinctive, and that's really powerful when you get to that point.
And you have to have the repetition. You have to have the time, spent working with those systems and what the way that it needs to be, so that you do notice that anomaly, and it is an anomaly and not just hey, this one's weird. So
and then hopefully you're not just doing that for the fun and the coolness of it, but you're actually, and these missions are very formally planned and defined and run for a discrete period of time. Could be a day or two, could be a week or two, depending on what it is. But really the power of those missions is the after action discussion. What did we learn, and then taking those learnings and getting the key information down into playbooks, into operational procedures, into plans to maybe readjust technology. So it's the learnings from the hunt mission that's really the power. So if you just run hunt missions, but you don't have that disciplined back end process, you may be losing some of the value of those missions.
Right. One of the things that we talk about probably every week on this show is doing fire drills and then testing your solution. Yeah. And then once you've got your run, then you can identify where to improve. Yeah. And this is applicable far beyond just an infrastructure test or a load test. The security side of it is a hugely important thing. Knowing what breaks is only so useful. Being able to address that fault and have a better solution on the other side of that test is where the value is.
Agreed. And one thing you got to be really careful for is some organizations, teams, want to checklist everything, right? And what I found throughout my experience is no two events, no two incidents are alike. There are similarities, of course, but they don't follow the same modus operandi. So if you are trying to capture things in checklists, I think you're already kind of missing the boat. What we tend to do is we try to think outcome based, right? So you take a certain incident or activity, and we get very clear on what's the desired outcome. And then we say, okay, if that's a desired outcome, what are the various paths to get to that desired outcome?
Right.
And then we ask ourselves, and I think this is the most important part of the whole analysis, is what can go wrong along the way? And that's the most powerful learnings, is to know, hey, if this happens, what do you do? What's your fallback position and everything? Because that's really maps more to the real world. It's not going to follow the checklist. So know where you got to go, and know the different routes you can go, and know what's going to go wrong, and then train that type of a process. And I think you'll be a lot more pleased with the result.
Absolutely. I think that's where actual scrimmages go a lot further in sports practice. You can do drills all day long, but when you actually are scrimmaging, you're seeing what is the give and take. Yeah,
it's all the uncertain things that you didn't anticipate, didn't expect. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on the end of our hour. Are there any threats that we have? We work with companies, right? But those companies are made up of individuals, and we don't ever work with the company. We always work with people. Yeah. And a lot of times those people are, sometimes that's where the issues start oftentimes. But one of the things that I've seen a lot this year is ransomware, right? It's been a big thing. And we get a lot of questions, even in our Rackspace community, about ransomware. And I just wanted to see if we could get, kind of your thoughts on ransomware and, avoiding that, right? So it's one of the things I've seen a lot is, backup seems to be the main mitigation for that. And then, just the general keep your computer safe, right? And don't click on links. But are there any other things that we're seeing? Because it can hit a personal computer, it can hit a network,
Right. No, I think this is another case of using a little practicality, little common sense. I mean, you hit the key things. I mean, I think the organizations that really suffered the biggest blow from ransomware is they didn't have usable functional backups or any backup whatsoever, right? I mean, ransomware in that respect is really not a threat. Then, if you're properly backed up. I think a lot of our other things that we've touched on, whether it's process-based, people-based, technology-based, looking for those anomalous activities, something that just doesn't look quite right. I mean, you can get a fairly reasonable baseline of expected activity, and you got to believe ransomware paints a little bit of a different signature, and if we can detect that delta, that could be the catalyst to say, hey, wait a minute, there's something more to hear. I mean, obviously, virtualizing some of the things we do insulates that a little bit further. But I think this, ransomware is another example of just kind of one of the new threats that across the board we just necessarily weren't ready for. Now, we're seeing a lot better training and awareness and solutions to get past that, and it'll be something different next year.
It seems like the same threat. They just found a new way to make it painful to the person and to get them to do something instead of just sending everybody in your address book a silly picture or something like that. It's actually potentially shutting down your business for a while. And so
absolutely
the same threats. So if you are vigilant for those and have mitigations against them, it's not as big of an issue.
Well, as a holiday PSA, go verify. Use at some point in the next couple of weeks to go verify your backups. Make sure that what you've got is what you expect, and you've got something useful there. And if you don't have backups, get on that. Take care of business. Yeah,
for sure.
Was there anything else that you'd like to leave the audience with as far as good takeaways from 2016 or things to watch out for in 2017?
Yeah, no, I'm going to just stick with a theme. I mean, take a very balanced view of cybersecurity. Don't allow yourself to get caught up in the hype. But that said, ask yourselves the right questions. I mean, what does matter most to the company? What is the posture of our protection mechanisms around those assets? You don't have to turn the threat component into a science project, but I think, just look at the general threat factors and ask yourself whether or not your protection mechanisms are sufficient. But recognize that go into this assuming that there'll be a hole somewhere, and then you need to then ask yourself, if somebody does penetrate a defense, are we able to detect that relatively quickly, and do we understand what's necessary to investigate, ultimately contain, and respond to that. So I think it's a fairly methodical process, without getting too hung up on any one aspect of it. But walk yourself through the process, and do we know what matters, and can we detect something unusual, and do we know how to contain and eventually stop that?
I think it goes back to where we started, right? So it's less hyperbolic, more measured, reasonable, realistic approach to security.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, there we go. That's a perfect place, I think, to wrap it up then.
Okay.
So thank you again so much for spending this hour with us. It was very informative, and I think that it's something that can be helpful to the industry and our customers in the future. So really appreciate you taking some time to speak with us.
No, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, that'll wrap it up for this show and for the year. Actually, I think we're going to take the rest of the year off, two more weeks, but we'll go ahead and wrap it up for the year. But we'll be back next year with a whole bunch of brand new episodes of Office Hours live from Rackspace. So on that note, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next year.
Happy holidays.